Want to know how Canada's top entrepreneurs think about creating significant wealth? Join me, Thane Stenner, founder of Stenner Wealth Partners at CG Wealth Management and host of the Smart Wealth Podcast. Download today at iHeartRadio or your favorite podcast platform. Subscribe now. Hello, everybody. I'm Thane Stenner, founder of Stenner Wealth Partners of CG Wealth Management, based here in Canada, Vancouver, Canada specifically. I'm also your host of the BNN Bloomberg Smart Wealth Podcast, where I get the opportunity to interview some thought leaders from various backgrounds and industries, and I've got one of those on today. I'm very excited to have as a special guest Judi Cunningham. One of the other things I'd like to just do a little shout out for this podcast for those listeners that have been tuning in on a regular basis. Recently, iHeartRadio has ranked the Smart Wealth Podcast in the top 20 fastest growing finance related podcasts on their platform. So it was kind of a pleasant, nice surprise to kind of hear about that. So thanks everybody for listening in, and really looking forward to today's session with Judi. I think everybody will really, really enjoy it. So welcome, Judi. Thank you for making it. So I'll give a little bit of background for everybody on Judi Cunningham. She's the founder of Trella Advisory Group, a consulting firm that works with family enterprises and families of wealth. She has a very interesting story, which we'll get into here shortly. She holds a master's in family systems counseling, which for those of you who are not familiar with that, is quite fascinating in that she's an expert around family dynamics and pertaining to family businesses and family wealth. So again, you're going to be hearing lots from Judi about that today. She's been doing that for over 25 years. So extremely lots of experience in this particular area, and she's kind of what I would call mastered the art of working with complex enterprising families. She's also known for innovative educational initiatives, and she's pioneered the Family Enterprise Advisor Program, which has established global standards for professional advisors of all types and stripes. Judi serves as the chair of the board of the Purposeful Planning Institute, which I actually want to hear a little bit more about today, which helps advisors serve families of wealth. So again, Judi, thank you for joining us from Toronto. I know you get around, you've lived in the US and you traveled to Europe, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but did you just do a trip to Japan?
I did.
Yes,
I
yes.
did. As did you.
Yes, as did I.
We could just spend the time talking about Japan if you want.
Well,
which was amazing.
maybe we'll tuck that in at the end.
Yeah.
A little bit. Yeah, I had a wonderful trip too, so we can definitely compare notes. So let's get this interview started. First of all, how did you get into this line of work? And maybe tell us about your family and how it relates to the work you're currently doing.
Yeah. Well, how I got into this work, like any good work, is I completely stumbled into it. So it was not by design. In fact, when I tell people what I do, they often look at me with this very perplexed look and they go, "How did you get into that?" And so I grew up in a family business, and when we were trying to go through transition, I started reaching out to all kinds of different advisors, lawyers, accountants, family therapists, like you name it. I was trying to figure out, because we were really struggling. I have 7 siblings. Whoa. And we were really struggling with how we were going to go through this transition of, primarily at that time, we were only talking about the business. Mm-hmm. And everybody had a different idea of how to do it. And so we were looking for guidance from experts. And what was happening is the advisors were saying to us, well, we don't know how to manage. We don't know anything about those family dynamics things. We just, we know about all the technical stuff. We know about the legal pieces. We know about the tax pieces. But these family dynamics, we don't really understand that. So we don't know what you should do. But once you figure that out, come back and we'll help kind of document everything and paper everything. So that at the same time, I was actually doing, while we were going through that transition, I was doing a master's in family systems counseling. And I had imagined that I was going to be counseling families and couples and individuals. And I was also a consultant working in the primarily in the OBHR world. I was working with large organizations in helping their teams work effectively together and helping individuals. It was before coaching was even a thing, the executive, or yeah, all the coaching that was going on that has now exploded. It was before all of that. So people were really struggling. I'm dating myself here, but anyway, so I was doing a number of different things, and they just I started getting calls from people saying, I understand you understand this family business stuff. And I'm like, well, I've lived it. I don't know whether I understand it, but I do understand dynamics, family dynamics, team dynamics, and business dynamics. So I do understand those things. So I started working with families. And then at the same time, I got a call from the dean of the business school at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. And he said, hey, I got your name from somebody. We're trying to start this thing for families. Can you help us? So what that did, for people that don't know about universities, universities are all very global. And so they have a very global reach. And so what that did was, as I got involved in that, I started traveling the world and learning about what different cultures were doing around families and how people were trying to solve some of the problems that I experienced firsthand in my family. And then I started helping other families try to work through that. So as I often say, I felt like I became a student of family business, and it just set me on this trajectory. I just ended up falling in love with the field, with the whole world of working with families. I will say that having worked in a whole variety of settings as a consultant, working with families is like nothing else. First of all, it's highly complex, but it is the most rewarding work I've ever done. It is truly, when you help people with their families and what's important to them, most important to them in their lives, it's amazing. And so it's such a dynamic industry. There's so many things, like we exist at that intersection between the technical, all the wealth and all the technical structures, and then all of the family dynamics. So anyway, that's a long story of how I got into it, but there are a lot of factors that kind of influenced it along the way.
Now, you mentioned earlier the point or the word in transition. So you can maybe elaborate a little bit on that. As to what type of transitions do you see that are critical for our family?
Well, that's actually, most of our clients come into us because they are going through some kind of transition. So the transitions that we see are so either a senior generation, a leading generation member is thinking about transitioning their business. Okay. So that's one transition. So who's going to lead the business into the next generation? What's going to happen in this, in the next stage or evolution of the business? So there's that transition. The other big transition that's happening is the transition of ownership and or wealth. So business owners typically own a whole slew of things. Sometimes their business is their largest asset. Sometimes their business is their smallest asset. And they've created all kinds of other wealth from that, we often call it the golden goose. But so it's different for all families, right? But when they are thinking about all their assets, what typically happens at some stage, usually later in life, in their 50s, 60s, 70s, where people are going, okay, we need to have an estate plan done. We need to think about how we're going to transition this wealth to our kids. Are our kids prepared? Will they know how to manage these assets, whether it's a business, whether it's liquid assets, whether it's real estate? Some families have very large heirloom assets like homes, farms, ranches, like all kinds of different things, right?
Yeah.
And so will they be able to manage these things? And then the other really tricky thing is, will they be able to manage them collectively? So, if you're transitioning from a first generation to a second generation, you're usually going from one or two people to many people. And that adds a level of complexity that just right there, unless they happen to have one child. That makes it a lot easier. I have a client right now where they're transitioning one to one. So, when they're thinking about what they're doing, they're not going, who should be doing what? They're saying, how do we get this person prepared? Because when you're transitioning a lot of wealth, it's not a simple process.
Yeah. So it's kind of assisting them to be equipped to be able
Yes.
to.
Yeah.
Now, just on an interluding question there, what are the dynamics like working with families where maybe the patriarchs are either trying to transition the reins of operational reins down to the next generation, or selling their business, and the communications around them, how do the dynamics change when the founder kind of wants to sell the business versus hand over the business?
Well, what I will say is, in general, communication in families is terrible. When I start working with a family, I will say, how well do you communicate? And they'll say, great, we have great communication, right? And then when I start talking to them and I'm like, okay, what you haven't talked about any of this stuff, right? And so it is a really interesting dynamic when the family members, the senior generation in particular, think that they're communicating when they're not. And communication comes in a couple of different forms. One is how well you're communicating. So can I articulate what I'm saying? Am I saying things in a way that you can hear it? So that's the quality of the communication. The other issue is we need the quantity of communication. So we need regular communication. So sometimes I'll work with families and then I'll say, have you talked about this? And they'll say, yes, of course, we've talked about that. And I'll say, when? They'll say 5 years ago. And I'm like, okay, have you ever had a conversation since 5 years ago? No, we have not. Okay, so could you imagine a 20-year-old who's now 25 have things changed in their life in 5 years? Have things changed in your life in 5 years? But, in particular, 20 and 30 somethings, the change that's happening in their lives is vast. And so I think sometimes families are like, oh, sure, we've talked about this, but they're not talking regularly on a, couple of times a year, multiple times a year, but regular communication. So to go back to your question, communication is always a challenge. When they're talking about transitioning to family, there is what I find is leading generation members are very hesitant to open everything up. They don't want to share everything. And not everyone. We do get a lot of families that are transparent, but many are not. And the reason why, and I hear this all the time, I don't want to tell them how much wealth there is. I don't want them to know, because if I tell them, they will completely adjust their lives accordingly. They're going to stop working. They're going to stop applying themselves in their own lives, because if they know there's a whole chunk of change, they're just not going to behave in the ways that they want them to behave, which is we want them to work hard and live their lives in their own right. So that's one piece. So there's a bit of an unwillingness to explain things. And so there's that piece. Now, when it comes to the sale of a business, I was working with a family one time and they came into the boardroom. We were supposed to be meeting about something else, and there was 13 third generation members, and the second generation came in and said, by the way, we have an offer on the business and we think we're going to sell it. And of the 13 third generation members, I think about 10 of them started crying. And they said, what's happening here? And they said, well, why didn't you tell us this?
Yeah.
And they're like, well, we didn't tell you because A, we didn't think you really cared. And they're like, what are you talking about? We really care. And B, we have to be very careful around what we're doing. And so we need to keep this pretty close.
Yep.
And they're like, yes, but that doesn't apply to us. So communications are different around different topics. But in general, there's often a hesitancy to talk really openly with the next generation, which is one of the things that we try to shift in families.
Well said. Stay with us. We'll be right back. We're just going to take a quick break.
Want to know how Canada's top entrepreneurs think about creating significant wealth? Join me, Thane Stenner, founder of Stenner Wealth Partners at CG Wealth Management and host of the Smart Wealth Podcast. Download today at iHeartRadio or your favorite podcast platform. Subscribe now.
Welcome back, everybody. We're with my special guest today. We're going to jump right back in. How would you say your industry has evolved over the last decade as far as advising?
Yeah, so it's evolved a lot. So I would say the first thing is the industry has exploded. So, 10 years ago, when I would talk to people about this industry, they were like, I don't really understand this. I don't really know what's going on, or why you think this is special in any way. And now, so the family office space has exploded, which for people that don't understand what a family office is, think about a business that just manages the assets that are not operating assets. So not a business, everything but the business sits inside the family office. And it's a business that provides oversight to all of those other assets. And so there's different types of family offices, and that industry has grown significantly. And I'm sure you've seen it.
Agreed. Yep.
Or work. It has grown significantly. The other thing that's happened is there's a lot of understanding now that all of the family dynamics can either help with the transition of assets, and it can also hinder. So I think the industry has changed, and that there's a lot more people that are trying to understand the family dynamic side. There are people that coming into the industry that are trying to help. So that's a big thing. And then the other thing that's happening is just the global trend of asset transition. Like we're going through with the baby boomers retiring, we're going through the largest transfer of assets in history, right? So in every estimation, as you know, every time I hear the number, it's some different number. It's 13 trillion. It's this many trillion. It's that many trillion. Let's just say it's a lot of money. Okay. And it's transferring. And these people, and I am seeing right now more than ever in our business, like we're getting calls all the time. Okay, we're thinking about transition. We need to start doing this. We need somebody to help us to work through how we're going to do it. And there's a level of urgency that I never have heard before in clients.
So why do you think that urgency is escalating these days?
Well, certainly during COVID, there was a level of urgency. I mean, honestly, I would get calls from people and I thought, oh gosh, these people are like worried they're going to die. So I think COVID shifted the landscape for sure. I think that is one of the factors. I think the other thing is that they're just, the senior generation is just aging. And I think there's pressure from the bottom up. So the rising generation is going, okay, let's go. And also they're also going, okay, I think it's time. And so they're starting to see like, okay, we have to plan. I don't know why this is happening, but there is more. So in the research, there used to be a lot of, like only 47% of business owners have a plan around what they're going to do around succession, right? Yep. Now we know that is becoming more and more prevalent. So people are planning more. And so I do think that um, there's a sensitivity or a recognition that planning is important. And so we need to start. I think there's also recognition, like when I say to families, when we start with them, I'll say, this is probably going to be a 2-year, pretty heavy lifting process. After that, it can slow down, but it's it's a lot in the front end to start this process, and it's a couple of years.
And to
They
do it
don't,
well. And to do it well.
yes, and they don't really blink at that. They know that they've got to go slow. They know that there's a lot of prep work that needs to happen in order to help the next generation get ready, to help them get ready. I think there's a process on both sides. Like there's a lot of focus in our field about the next generation. So there's a lot of focus that, oh, we have to prep the next generation. I think that equally, we have to prep the current generation because they're not really ready to let go. They're not really, they say the words, but when it comes down to it and you're like, are you really ready? And they're like, oh yeah. And then they get into it and they're like, yeah, I'm not really ready for this. Right.
Okay. So let me pause with you there. So why, what's holding them back? I think I've got some ideas around it. In fact,
I think there's such an emotional piece that goes on with, especially business owners of significant, and I'm talking, our clients, some of our clients are many, many billions. And so when you are owning, founding a very significant business, it is who you are. And I think they start to feel so identified with the business and with the wealth in general. I remember a business owner of a very large business. He said to me, I was talking to him about retirement and when he thought he might do that. And he said, oh, not for a long time. And I said, well, can you ever imagine retiring? And he said, no, all my friends tell me that retirement is the quickest route to irrelevance that you can have. So basically, as soon as you retire, one day you're everything to people. And the next day you're no one, right? Nobody wants to talk to you. Nobody wants to go for lunch with you. Nobody cares what you think.
So relevance.
Yes. Yeah. So relevance is a big one, right?
Yeah.
And he's like, no, thank you. I don't want that. I don't want to be irrelevant. Thanks.
Yeah, which creates its own set of challenges and issues, right? Thereafter. So,
yeah.
What about control?
Well, I mean, look, a lot of the senior generation, do I think they like control? Yes, but here's the thing about control. People say, "Oh, that person's a control freak." I believe we're all control freaks. We just want to control certain things. So what I want to control are different from what you want to control, but we're all control freaks. So does this senior generation member want to control their assets, the outcomes around the assets, what they're going to do with them, how they're going to, yes, I would say they do. And sometimes to their detriment, right? So they are trying to hang on so tight that it's unhelpful to people around them, right? And it really is unhelpful.
So tell me a little bit more about Trella Advisory Group without being infomercial for you, but I mean, like just it's basically a consulting or counseling type of firm.
No, it's a consulting firm. We have counselors, but we are a consulting firm. We don't do counseling per se, although we do have people that have counseling backgrounds like myself and other people. So basically it's a consulting firm where we come together, like we kind of surround a family. We come together with a team and we put the team that we think is the right team based on skill sets, based on personality, based on who we think will be able to develop relationships. And so we put that team around a family and we basically do everything that helps that family transition. So we are helping the current generation get clear about what they have. So we do a full structure and estate review. So we have technicians on our team, like CPAs and planners and so forth. And so we do a full kind of build out of, okay, this is what your estate looks like. This is what you have. Because what we find is most people don't really understand what they have in place right now. So we don't do estate planning. We're not technicians in that way. We refer, like, all of that is done by other advisors. But what we do is we do summarize everything that they have, and we do a lot of education around what they have.
Cool.
And then, so we understand that. And then we come in and we actually understand what's going on in the family. So for the players, what are the skill sets? What are the competencies? What are the interest levels? What do people want in their lives? Because the senior generation sometimes has an idea of what they want their kids to do. And the kids, when we talk to the kids, sometimes they're 40 and years old. And so sometimes those so-called kids are like, I'm not interested in any of that. So it's also understanding what all the individuals are looking for. And then we try to bring all that stuff together and put a plan together for the family. And then we just basically then for the time that we're working with them, we just execute that plan. And we kind of take them. So if they say, okay, at the end of this, we want a shareholders agreement, or at the end of this, we want to successfully transition the business, we will work with them kind of through that whole process and do all the necessary things along the way in order to get them there. So that's essentially, and we have specialists so we have family therapists, we've got governance specialists, we've got CPAs, we've got, as I said, we've got planners, we've got like financial planners, we've got conflict management specialists, got succession specialists. So we've got kind of a variety of different specialties leadership development. So if somebody needs leadership development in the next generation, we can do 360s and coaching and all the different things to get the next generation up to speed. So, yeah.
So you and I have known each other for over 15 years. I remember meeting with you. I was going to say, we'll keep it at 15 years for now.
Yeah, okay.
But I remember some of our meetings with the UBC Business Family Center. It was quite fascinating. Just, there's definitely some common issues there. But Judi, what would you say your superpower is?
Oh, well, okay. My superpower. What is my superpower? I think I have a really, I have the ability to cut through a lot of stuff pretty quickly and get to the heart of the issue. So when I'm working with families, sometimes, because I find that in families, there's so much camouflage that's going on around what an issue might be. So I have a way of just kind of cutting through everything and then kind of naming it. And people go, yeah, that's it. And then we can deal with it. So I think I'm pretty good at that.
My observation of you over the years has been that you know how to build trust. And I think you're very good at asking exceptional questions, which kind of helps you navigate and kind of get to the meaty or the substance of real issues that they need to deal with.
Thank you.
So you're welcome. So, we're talking about family dynamics here. Like, I presume that there's times in which, family dynamics lead to, strains between family members around financial issues, decision making, sell the business, don't sell the business, philanthropic issues around, where to, family foundations or where to donate to or things like that. So, if you had to really boil it down, what would be the main issues in your career doing this work? What would be the 3 or 4 main challenges that you kind of see in some derivative form over and over that generally need to get to overcome?
Yeah. So one of the biggest ones in the rising generation is the competitiveness. So the competition between
Siblings.
members of the family, like siblings or
Yeah.
cousins, but it particularly happens in sibling groups.
Yes.
Where they somehow if one of their siblings is successful, it makes them feel less successful. So I was just talking to a family member, and we were doing one of these kind of communication profiles, and she was so disappointed where she came out on this profile. And I said, why? Like, your talents, like what you bring to the table is so necessary and so strong and so important. And she's like, yeah, I just don't like that about myself, because I think she looks at her siblings and says, I think I need to be more like them. And so this is I think people have a hard time, seeing themselves clearly and knowing what they bring to the table. I think B, they're competitive amongst each other because they think that if that person succeeds, that means I'm going to be less successful. And it doesn't mean that, right? Like one person can succeed and other people can succeed. It's just that success looks different. And that sometimes, I think the unfortunate thing in our field is that people often measure success by money, by success in business. So it's kind of this business money kind of measurement tool when there's so many other things, right? So like when I work with families, at the end of the work, any piece of work that we're doing with them, when I ask them what they appreciated the most about the conversation, they will say the connection with my family, the relationship benefit. They're not talking about, oh, we sorted out that money issue or that business thing, or that's easier to sort out. It's all the relationship dynamics that at the core is generally what's really important to people. So I think this is such a big challenge in working with families. I think the other thing around the dance between the senior generation and the rising generation around how much do we tell them? Should we ever tell them? I always laugh in families, when you have these billionaire families, and I'm like, you think they don't know? Like, they know. Okay. So they might not have the exact numbers, but they know that there's money. They're flying around in sometimes private jets. They're living in fancy houses. They have fancy houses themselves because you've helped them. Like they're not the same as their friends. And so they may not know what the numbers are, but they know. And then the other problem that I always say is, if they're not ready now, when? And they go, well, what do you mean? I go, okay, so they're 30 and you say they're not ready. When they're 40, are they going to be ready? Well, I don't know. Okay, well, what do they need to be doing? Do they need to display something? Do they need to be acting in a particular way that tells you that they're ready? And don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting they should just tell them everything, but there isn't as much time spent on preparing them for the wealth as there is talking about how much wealth there is and the building of the wealth. Right. So I just, so that's a really big challenge is, getting the senior generation comfortable enough that they can start to open up, and also getting the rising generation ready to receive. That's a big one as well.
Yeah. So that leads actually perfectly into my next question is, can you give a couple of examples of engagements, without any names, of course, but just walk us through a couple examples what were some of the initial findings, challenges, and then kind of where you help to take them maybe over the course of a 1, 2, 3 year time frame?
Yeah. So what happens, so let me just think about one family. Okay. So when we came in, they're an international family. So they have family members all over the world. And they are trying to get the next generation up to speed. So they want them to be more aware of what's happening. And they haven't really shared anything. So that was really the focus. Okay. Well, when we went in, sorry, go ahead.
It maybe just provide kind of ages, like ballpark.
Oh, they're in their like the senior generation is in the 50, 60 time frame in their life stage, and the next generation is in their teens, 20s, and 30s. Okay. And so they are going, okay, we need to kind of get these people up to speed. Okay.
Right.
So so when we go in and we start to gather a bunch of information, what we discovered was that they're actually not ready to share anything because they're not actually, things are not organized at their level, right? So there's still a lot of work to do, and was a lot of work to do with the current generation. So we had to kind of pull back and say, we need to slow this down because we got to get your house in order to then start to say, okay, how and when. And so we had to rethink what we shared with the next generation and what the family shares, not us sharing, it's the family sharing, but what, the plan for how that would all unfold. So we spent a lot of time gathering a lot of information, understanding what the current generation was thinking, what was important to them, how they saw this unfolding, what kind of education they thought their children needed, et cetera, et cetera. And so then we met with them. We met with the next generation. And this is, imagine, over a fairly long period of time, like 9 months. So we're not just kind of like boom, 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 right? It's a lot of, so there's a lot of one-on-one work. There's a lot of, so you got the individual work, there's collective work with different generations. And there's a lot of planning in there and kind of, document collection, governance creation. So one of the things that what we do with families is we write a lot of policies around things like what happens with shares of businesses or assets. How do they transfer? When do they transfer? So it's like precursors to a shareholders agreement. So we put these policies together, redemptions and dividend policies. We write policies on, so if you're going to get a benefit from the business, this is what it would look like. And this is what the thresholds in the business would need to meet in order to get this. These are the things that you are doing in your lives in order to receive this benefit. So the roles and responsibilities of a beneficiary of a trust. And so there are so many different things that we're working on that are, helping put structure around families. We help write policies on marriage agreements. We're trying to take the stigma around marriage agreements out of the conversation. I mean, it's something that's really important, and it protects everyone. And and what I think is the most important thing about all of this stuff, it's not the actual document. People get really focused on these documents. It's the conversation that leads to the document, because it clarifies, where do we stand in the event of relationship dissolution? What are we going to do, and how do we see that? So it's just really good conversation. So these are the kinds of things that, like we are talking to families about in this family. We talk over the course of a couple of years. And so over that time, we met with the family multiple times, and some in smaller groups. Sometimes it's branches of a family. Sometimes it's generations. Sometimes it's a whole family together. And so that's a very typical unfolding.
This is fascinating stuff. We're just going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. So please stay with us.
Want to know how Canada's top entrepreneurs think about creating significant wealth? Join me, Thane Stenner, founder of Stenner Wealth Partners at CG Wealth Management and host of the Smart Wealth Podcast. Download today at iHeartRadio or your favorite podcast platform. Subscribe now.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm with my special guest, Judi Cunningham. So let's get started again. I've got 3 more key questions for you before we wrap up. So when you engage with a family, do you try to help establish what are the objectives of this planning over the course of the next 1, 2, 3 years? Like you kind of give a roadmap in essence?
Yeah. So we do that. It usually takes us about 3 or 4 months to figure that out. Gotcha. Because that's all the gathering. That's where we really find out, oh, okay, they don't have this. They don't have a really clear estate plan, or their wills are out of date. I mean, the kinds of things that we have found are like, we're like, oh, this needs to get handled right away.
Yes.
Like, right.
Yeah,
so,
well, exactly.
Yeah, we're finding things that we go, okay, these can take time. Like you can work on this slowly. And then we work really closely with the lawyers, the accountants, all of the different advisors that are working with the family.
So it's like a inventory check or discovery phase first to see, where are we at, right? Where are we at overall? So I've got to ask you another question though. A lot of these entrepreneurial business families and entrepreneurs and that have significant wealth, do you find that at times the patriarch or the senior generation are they impatient? Do they find this process to be like I can tell by how you have spoken for years and even on this interview, the mind of an entrepreneur probably wants to kind of get stuff done.
Yeah.
Like, so you must wrestle with that. Like that's got to be something
all the time.
So how do you deal with that, Judi?
Yeah, it's not easy. Sometimes it's okay. We just need to slow this down. You're going to need to be patient. And it is also incumbent on us to make sure that we are meeting concrete deliverables. So this isn't just let's talk for the next 3 years and we'll just talk about a whole bunch of stuff. We need to complete things. There needs to be like what I know I'm the same way as human beings. We love when I love when I'm like, okay, I can tick that off my list and that's done. So we have concrete deliverables inside of this larger deliverable, which there's going to be a lot of nebulous things, a lot of things that are organic that will unfold over time. And we can't, I mean, when we start working with a family, I always say to families, look, we're going to find things that we never, we just didn't think would be there.
Yeah.
And we'll discover that. And it doesn't matter. We just work through it. But there is a level of patience that's necessary, right? Because it's we can't just push beyond these things.
Correct. Yeah, you can't just roll over those things,
no,
right?
You cannot roll over.
Yeah. So you've got, I would presume that you've got a talent or a skill to connect the dots or the benefits to these entrepreneurs by being patient. So I'm sure there's ways in which you kind of say, look, yes, it's slower in some ways, but here's what you're going to get out of it as a family.
One of the things that we do is we build a project plan and we review that project plan with them monthly. Here's what we've done. This is what we've completed.
Very good.
This is what we're now working on. And this is the stuff that's still ahead of us. So they see the long journey but they also see, okay, we finished this, tick. We're now working on this. We're going to finish this in the next month or two. So
Got
they
it.
see those things. So we have a project plan that we are sharing with them and working with them
Right.
around. So they feel like, okay, I got it. Right.
So, so what about issues around fairness within
Uh-huh.
the family? You knew I was going to kind of go there
Oh yeah.
eventually. Yeah. So, you know, I remember one of our clients, multi-generational business owner and whatnot, and they very successful. And I remember, I think part of it was cultural, candidly, but remember the dad saying, you know, fair does not mean equal.
Uh-huh.
So how do you help families deal with what fairness issues around assets or duties or recognitions, things like that?
Yeah. Fairness is a really difficult one to manage. It is what I think is fair and what you think is fair. Right now, we could talk about anything, like how much time I spoke versus how much time you spoke. And you could say, well, that's not fair, right? Like every single thing that we are dealing with, people have an idea of what's fair and what's not fair. So, and there is no answer to fair because
Yeah.
there's no right. And it's about the dialogue. So when somebody says that's not fair, I go, okay, we clearly need a conversation here. So, and what is it that will make it feel okay to you? Like what needs to happen in order for you to feel like there is a level of fairness? And sometimes fairness is rooted in such deep stuff that it's not easy sometimes to get to what I think needs to happen in order for it to feel fair. And so, because sometimes fair is equal for people, but sometimes it's not. And the problem is, equal is impossible. I say this to people all the time. There is no equal out there because if you take a business that's worth $10 million, you know, this is a really typical asset equalization process. I'm going to give my business to my kid and it's a $10 million business, one kid. I'm going to give $10 million policy to another kid and I'm going to give $10 million worth of real estate assets to another kid.
Yep.
Equal, right? They're all valued at $10 million. No.
No.
It's not equal.
No, tax consideration, time consideration, like all these different things.
There's so many, there's growth aspects. Like what if that $10 million business grows to a $300 million business?
Yep.
Was that equal? What about the insurance policy? They don't get access to it for 40 years or 30 years. You know, the real estate, something happens to the market and it crashes, whatever, any number, or the real estate prices go through the roof.
Yes.
And all that real estate that was 10 million is worth 70 million or whatever, right? So there's so many different, so equal is not it's an illusion.
Gotcha. So on that same theme or thread, in your own family, like you've had a successful business family yourselves, and I don't want to pry too much or openly on this, but I mean you had a lot of siblings too. You have a lot of siblings. So have you felt your own family kind of get to a place of relatively acceptable fairness in your journey?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, is it equal? No, but I think that we had really good dialogue. Like I know I feel resolved and I think other people feel resolved that where we are, we're happy with. Right? Like I don't think that there's any kind of long lasting that wasn't fair or that, you know, and is it equal? It's not equal, right? But that's okay because we've had a lot of discussion about it and people's different perspectives, and that's an important thing, right?
Which, so getting to acceptance, I think, is part of what you're saying. But the key theme I keep hearing with you, Judi, is communication, communication, asking the right questions and being patient through the process, because family is too important, right? It's not like
Yeah.
you're hiring family, you are family
Yeah.
already. So with that in mind, I'm going to give you the cleanup portion of the interview today. If you had to leave people, listeners and viewers of this podcast, with 2 or 3 key themes, what would you finish us off with?
Themes, or just like things that I would recommend that they do, or
Things that
okay.
you recommend that they do.
Well, all right. So I would say start now, like start. So if you are needing to, that a transition is on the horizon, start a lot earlier than you thought you needed to, because it does take time and it will make it a lot less stressful. What I always say to families is, if you do this at a slower pace, it makes it a lot easier. Like, the intensity of the pace sometimes makes it harder. The other thing is learning how to really be honest with one another is such an important thing as we're working through some of these things. It's okay. Like, I'm working with a family right now, and one of the family members said, I feel guilty about this, but I want money. I want liquidity. I want some money out of this. And I'm like, why do you feel guilty about that? That's okay. Right? So, and I think sometimes people don't want to say what they really want because they're afraid of how it will be received. And so that conversation actually led to a family conversation, which has transformed a lot of the way they're thinking as a family. And so I think that was a real gift to the family, because it allowed them to talk about stuff that they hadn't previously talked about. So the other piece is, allow yourself to be truthful and honest about what you want, and begin the conversations, and make sure, I think I'm going to say the third thing, make sure you get someone to help you. Don't try and do this. There are lots of really good people in this field, and find someone that you feel like can really help you and will help you navigate, because there's a lot of complexity inside of all the family dynamics, all the technical stuff, all the money stuff. When you marry kind of money and family together, the level of complexity is enormous.
Yeah, it's kind of like, would you do heart surgery or brain surgery on yourself, right?
Yeah. So get help. Get help.
I agree. Well, listen, Judi, this has been absolutely fantastic catching up with you. Thank you for sharing kind of your expertise and wisdom on these thoughts. How would people get in contact with you should they have further questions?
Our website is trella.ca. So that's probably the easiest thing. They can contact us through our website, and don't hesitate to reach out. Even if you just have, like, I need some direction around something, it doesn't mean you just need to reach out and say, I want to hire you. We can also help you direct, like I can help you direct to whatever help you may need.
Excellent. So. Very, very, very well said. Well, thank you once again, Judi. Thanks everybody for listening to today's session with Judi Cunningham of Trella Advisory Group. It's been very insightful, and it's an important topic given the demographics of where businesses are transitioning, families are transitioning here in Canada and around the world. It's becoming a bigger issue. And I think, Judi, you're one of the pioneers in the industry. And again, I really want to thank you for making the time.
Thank you, Thane. It's been such a pleasure just to reconnect with you and spend some time with you. So thank you.
So that was Judi Cunningham, founder of Trella, a firm that helps multi-generational families or family enterprises grow and evolve and transition in their journey. We hope you're enjoying the Smart Wealth podcast as much as I enjoy hosting. So please stay tuned for other authentic personal conversations with some amazing people that I get to interview, and who've already accomplished a lot in their careers and industries and still have a lot more to contribute. Again, I'm Thane Stenner, and thanks for listening to the Smart Wealth podcast.
The comments and opinions expressed in this podcast are the results of work done by Stenner Wealth Partners. They may differ from the opinion of Canaccord Genuity Corp. And should not be considered as representative of Canaccord's beliefs, opinions, or recommendations. All views expressed in this podcast are provided for informational purposes only and do not constitute an offer or solicitation to buy or sell any securities. The statements expressed herein are not intended to provide tax, legal, or financial advice, and under no circumstances should be construed as a solicitation to act as a securities broker or dealer in any jurisdiction. All views are intended for general circulation only and do not have any regard to the specific investment objectives, financial situation, or general needs of any particular person, organization, or institution. Canaccord is a member of the CIPF. The comments expressed in this podcast are the results of work done by Stenner Wealth Partners. They may differ from the opinion of Canaccord Genuity Corp. And should not be considered as representative of Canaccord's beliefs, opinions, or recommendations. All views expressed in this podcast are provided for informational purposes only and do not constitute an offer or solicitation to buy or sell any securities. The statements expressed herein are not intended to provide tax, legal, or financial advice, and under no circumstances should be construed as a solicitation to act as a securities broker or dealer in any jurisdiction. All views are intended for general circulation only and do not have any regard to the specific investment objectives, financial situation, or general needs of any particular person, organization, or institution. Canaccord is a member of the CIPF.